Good afternoon and welcome to another upload from Rogue Gunner 12. It's been 42 years since the Falklands War, something I remember all the time, having served in the conflict. I was going to read to you the official regimental diaries of the war, but I felt that it skirted over today's significant event on the 8th of June 1982, when the troop ship Sir Galahad was hit by an Argentinian airstrike, which caused the largest loss of life to British forces since World War II. So I thought I would read an excerpt from my book, which gives you the incident from the aspect of a young soldier, which I was at that time at 19 years of age. The pace of the war was gathering momentum, heading towards climax, and the Argentinian forces looked as though they might be about to throw in the towel. We received orders to prepare to move. The Welsh Guards of 5 Brigade were shifted from San Carlos Water to Bluff Cove, much closer to Stanley, to assist with the final stages of the ground war. We would be tasked with giving them air defence cover while they waited to come ashore, then during the transfer, and finally once they had landed. We were to travel aboard the Royal Fleet auxiliary ship, Sir Galahad. The other troops accompanying us on her sister, Sir Tristram. The idea was that we would be helicoptered aboard late in the day and set off at dusk. That way we would travel and arrive under the cover of darkness, and the Galahad could drop us off and be back at San Carlos by dawn. I was glad we were going to be on the move again. I was sick of getting bombed and watching ships sink at San Carlos. I might as well get bombed and watch ships sink somewhere else. But I was surprised that 3-2 Alpha had been given this important task. The continuing problems with our rapier system meant that the cover we could provide would be unreliable at best. I would have thought that the top brass would have wanted the best kit protecting their men. These things cannot or should not be left to chance. As it turned out, 3-2 Alpha was just a number of spanners thrown in the works, the first couple having been lobbed right from the start. First, we were late boarding and didn't set off until 5 hours behind schedule. This was good in one way because it meant we went aboard during the hours of darkness, which made us feel a lot safer. But the downside of this was that we would arrive at the other end after dawn in daylight. Second, because of the delay, the ship was sailing to Port Pleasant, Fitzroy, an inlet 3 or 4 miles closer to where we were setting off from, and on a 2 or 3 hour march overland to Bluff Cove. But no one told the Welsh Guards about the change of destination. Right from the start, I had a bad feeling about being at sea again. It was only a couple of weeks since I'd seen the Antelope go up like an arsonist's dream. That had been utterly horrific to watch, and a sick feeling spread through my guts as we went on board the Sir Galahad. The guardsmen didn't seem to share my concern. In fact, I was astounded. Apart from their uniform, it was as if they were on a P&O cruise to the Caribbean. It wasn't their fault. As members of 5 Brigade, they hadn't yet witnessed the sudden and terrible ferocity of a successful air attack. We must have looked pretty rough, and we probably stank too. Anyway, we got some funny looks from the Welsh Guards as we paced up and down nervously like cats in a Chinese takeaway. They gave us a wide berth at first. They didn't know who we were, as we weren't wearing any headdress. I probably thought we were special forces or something. But as soon as they worked out we were just the Royal Artillery, dogs' bodies, One of their officers ordered us to grab mops and buckets and start scrubbing the boat from top to bottom, washing out the bogs and everything. At least it gave us something to think about and focus on. After an hour or so of that, and making the most of the unfamiliar warmth of my surroundings, I fell asleep, my exhaustion overcoming my fear as the throb of the engines lulled me away. A couple of hours later, I woke up, hot and clammy. I peeled some of the layers of my clothing off. The stale smell of sweat, dirt, and weeks-old underwear hit me like a slap in the face. I was right. I did stink. I took advantage of the hot pipes to dry some of my kit, changed my socks, and scraped some of the crap off my boots so I could polish them. Not long after that, we pulled into, of all places, Port Pleasant, which wasn't particularly well named, and dropped anchor. It was June the 8th. It was dawn, all right, and not just any old dawn, either. The weather had been cloudy and squally in recent days, a real bonus because that restricted enemy air activity. Today, the sky was bright and clear and blue, horribly ripe for an air attack. I made my way up on the deck at this time, getting myself on stag with my rapier, standing next to our kit in the cargo nets. It felt very like the day we arrived at San Carlos Water, when I'd been up top wondering where the opposition were. And then they suddenly arrived. We were anchored in a narrow channel, bobbing gently in almost flat, calm sea, with the greeny grey hills of the Falklands overlooking us. Sheep grazed unconcerned on the heather a mile or two away, and the only sound was the slap of the gentle swell on the ship's hull, the low thrum of the idling engines, and the screech of seagulls riding the breeze above us. If I was writing a bad thriller, I'd probably say it was ominously quiet. You could see for miles in the crystal clear air. I was very nervous. Actually, scratch that, I was shitting bricks. I felt sick right down in my guts, and I strained to hear the roar of approaching turbines. I was sure, absolutely convinced, that we would be visited by our South American friends very soon, and we needed to get moving. Otherwise, we were going to find us sitting around like toy boats in a pond. The phrase sitting ducks is one of the most overused there is, but it applied absolutely to us at that point. We were anchored up around 200 yards from the shore, great visibility. There was no escort travelling with us, and no anti-aircraft capability aboard either boat to speak of, just a couple of Bofors guns. The Welsh Guards had offered to defend us with their machine guns, which would have been better than nothing, but this offer had been rejected by the captain of the Sir Galahad. I think he thought rapier and air combat patrols were providing cover, but we were the rapier, and we were still aboard, and we were malfunctioning anyway, as were others. Additionally, there were no Harrier support because a strip at San Carlos had been damaged by a crash landing and was temporarily out of service. The nearest Harriers were operating from HMS Hermes, kept far out to sea for safety reasons. And that, and the fact had plenty of other jobs to do, rendered them ineffective too. Add to the fact that we were nice and close to the Argentinian positions, so they would surely be getting on the blower as we sat there, and you begin to see our predicament. Oh well, we'd be getting off soon. But we didn't. We just stayed put. It seemed like we were waiting there for hours. It was blindingly obvious to me that it wasn't a question of whether we would be attacked, just when it would happen and how bad it would be. The longer we waited, the nearer it got. Not long after we dropped anchor, a guy called Major Ewan Sotheby Taylor came aboard. A few years earlier, he'd been in command of the Royal Marines detachment stationed on the islands, and he knew every cove and crag of the place like the back of his hand. He also knew we were extremely vulnerable to air attack, so he had commandeered a couple of landing crafts and was desperate for the Welsh Guards officers to get their guys off the ship. But they refused. Apparently, they didn't want to mix men and ammunition in the same boats, and anyway, they couldn't understand why we couldn't just sail there the 3 or 4 miles around the corner to their original destination, Bluff Cove. Why should their guys have to get their boots all muddy marching over the hill? Like their soldiers, I guess they knew an air attack was possible. They just hadn't seen one. They didn't know how quickly it could happen, or how awful, how horrible it could be. Why would they? They'd spent their war out to sea on QE2 at this point. It was probably already too late, as these conversations were going on. An Argentinian observation post on Mount Harriet had seen us and got on the radio to the Argentine Air Force on the mainland. At that point, a lot of young Welsh guards were already dead men. They didn't know that, and they seemed totally relaxed, watching cartoons on the TV and playing cards, having a laugh and a joke. They must have thought I was nuts, wired to the eyeballs with stress and adrenaline. Every minute my heart rate increased. I started to sweat heavily despite the cold, and my mouth was dry as sandpaper. I scanned the horizon constantly. Where's the fucking choppers? Let's get off this tub quick. I wanted to shout and scream at someone to pull their finger out, but we sat there for what seemed like a lifetime, and still nothing happened. My old religious hypocrisy returned. I remembered I had a miraculous medal in my combat jacket pocket. It was silver and about the size of an old halfpence piece, with a picture of the Virgin Mary on it. I opened the flap of my pocket to get the medal out for good luck and put my hand inside. Nothing. Oh shit, where's it at? I searched in all of my pockets. Gone. I've had it. It's a sign I'm going to die. Don't be daft, you wanker. It can't help you. Yes, it can. Where the fuck is it? Excuse my language, God. Suddenly, I realised that it was in my other jacket, which was in my large pack and under the cargo net. I raced to the net and started searching through all of the kit, tearing at it frantically until I found my pack. I was in a state of panic now as I fiddled with the straps and buckles, thinking, I'm bound to hear the choppers coming any second to take us off, and everyone on board will be looking at me tangled up in the netting like some demented crab dressed in camouflage. Or I will hear Argentinian jet engines. I found the medal. Thank you, Lord. I relaxed slightly. I've got everything now. I'm ready to go. And what happened? Still nothing. I thought back to old war movies. The troops always seemed to have a sense of urgency. I remembered the great film, Arnhem film, A Bridge Too Far. The bit where the Polish paras were paddling like crazy to get across the river before they're seen by the Germans. Of course, they are seen, and nearly all of them perish in the water under raking Spandau fire. Well, that was a cheerful thought, but not to worry. We're the British. We're the experts at warfare. We've been doing this sort of thing for centuries all over the world since the days of wooden galleons and before. And we've stuffed everybody everywhere. We've done the French, we've done the Germans, we've done the Spanish. We used to rule the entire bloody world. We know what we're doing. We know what's what. We aren't scared of a few Argentinians. Yeah, right, bollocks. Please, some bastard with a pips on his shoulder, make a decision. I can see what's coming, and I'm a little nobody gunner. Why can't you? Alas, Bob and the rest of our lads appeared on deck and told me to get ready to move. Someone must have pressed the bell. We were getting off the bus. Thank fuck for that. I remember Quinny and Benny moaning because they'd missed the end of Bugs Bunny. Well, at least the guards got to watch it, the poor bastards. I could hear the comforting whop, whop, whop of rotor blades echoing through the hills, and we quickly lined up in our chalk. After hooking the launcher up to the first chopper, we jumped on board the second for a quick 2 or 3 minute jaunt to terra firma. Even on a short flight like that one, the heat inside the aircraft starts to make you sleepy, especially as a major adrenaline surge starts to die off. I lay there, feeling comfortable and warm. I didn't want to get off, back out into the cold, soggy ground around Fitzroy. I wanted to stay in this roaring, shaking metal room for the rest of my days. But sadly, and all too soon, the nose of the chopper lifted and we sank to the ground. It was time to get out from the oven back into the fridge. We found ourselves in the middle of the maroon machine too, Para. We were awaiting orders. They were awaiting orders for the final push on Stanley. The Paras are a unique group of fighting men who hate all soldiers who don't wear their famous red beret, even though we were on their side and our missiles could, in theory, protect them from air attack. We were still crapats, substandard military scum in their eyes, almost. Worse even than the Argies. At least they gave them a fight. If it was a choice between giving a British para his last cigarette to a wounded British crapper or a wounded Argentine paratrooper that just killed half his mates, you can bet he'd favour the Argie. It's the airborne brotherhood. They stick together. They weren't particularly pleasant to work alongside, but they had my respect, that's for sure. They were our shock troops, the soldiers any army needs to win was thoroughly professional. They did not know the meaning of the word defeat. As soon as the choppers dropped the rapier off, we got into action as fast as we could. The Paras eyed us with suspicion, curiosity as we ran around the cables and equipment like ants on speed. After about 15 minutes, we were up and running and starting to test and adjust the system to make sure it was functioning correctly. Even as I looked through the optics at the Galahad, I could see that nothing was moving on board. She and the Tristram must have been at anchor for hours now. I couldn't understand for the life of me why they weren't getting the lads off. We'd passed 3-2 Alpha's T's and A's test and adjustments, but we weren't happy. That persistent intermittent tracker head problem was still there. I kept hearing the system's fault tone in my headset. This is a knocking sound like a woodpecker tapping on a tree. Once you hear this sound, you know that your high-tech weapon system will not work. It's nothing more than a lump of very expensive scrap metal. It was tremendously frustrating. 1 minute everything seemed to be working fine, the next the deadly knocking in your ears. But there was nothing to be done until the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers boys were able to get to us. We'd just have to do the best we could. I looked around our position. Once again, there was no cover. We were totally windswept and stuck out like tits on a bull. As I write this, I find myself, or as I should say now, as I read this, I find myself drifting back to that day 42 years ago. I feel uneasy, sick, jumpy, just as I did then. I was very frightened, basically. The whole day had been too quiet and uneventful. Even the Paras were taking it easy, grabbing the opportunity to sort their kit out, clean their rifles and get some scoff down their throats. 3-2 Alpha was the only real air defence cover, and that knocking tone in my ear just wouldn't go away for long. It was just after 1300 I was aboard the Galahad and the Tristram, half a mile away on the flat grey sea. The Hooray Henrys were finally coming to a decision as to how to disembark, several hours after arriving. The sky was clear and weak. Wintry sun was hanging by a thread somewhere above the horizon. Off in the distance, there would have been a noise of the ongoing battle, but I didn't really notice. The only sound was the low chat of the nearby Paras, and closer, the other members of 3-2 Alpha, the keening of seabirds wheeling overhead, and the flap and slap of my smock as the wind tugged at it. Around 1400 hours, I was tracking visually around the valleys, then out to sea, looking for enemy activity when my heart missed a beat. I could clearly see a Skyhawk heading right for the ships. Then I saw more. "Bogies, incoming!" I yelled, and all hell broke loose as the lads around me sprang into action. At this point, I could not hear the noise of the jet engines. Usually we'd receive the urgent message, "Air raid warning red," sent by the battery command post on the radio, although on this occasion I don't remember hearing it. It later transpired that a vital radar system operated for us by Chile was down for essential maintenance work Just another dodgy roll of the dice for the lads aboard the Galahad. The Skyhawks were making their way at low level to the large grey sitting ducks wallowing in the Sound below me. The other lads had sprung into action, Bob by my side, more missiles being readied. The Paras were starting to stand up, and a few had already begun firing their rifles and machine guns. I concentrated on the lead jet. I had the crosshairs smack bang in the middle of them. "Target tracking, in cover," Bob screamed. "Engage! Firing!" I pressed the fire button with my left-hand index finger. Nothing, except that horrible, familiar woodpecker tapping on the tree in my bone dome. I pressed again and again and again. All I got was tap, 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 drowned out now by the screech of their engines, rolling over the water and off the hill towards us. The attack came and went in the blink of an eye. The lead Skyhawk's two 250-kilogram high explosive bombs hit the Sir Galahad and exploded with devastating effect. The second pilot missed his bombs, sending huge fountains of water crashing over the flames as they detonated in the sea. But the third A-4 hit the target, adding to the inferno. The air was full of the sound of ear-piercing explosions. Jet engines and the unearthly howling of the nearby Paras, screaming in fury. At the Argentinians, and unloading thousands of rounds of GPMG and rifle fire in their wake. By the grace of God, the bombs that had hit the Tristram had failed to explode, though 2 men were killed by them. But the Galahad was already well ablaze. In a twisted irony, she was carrying a large quantity of petrol for the rapier generators, and this and the ammunition aboard were a lethal combination. Soldiers were jumping in the water with their clothes on fire, as others ran around on the deck trying to get off. As the carnage unfolded in front of me, I could do nothing but stand there watching men burn. It was surreal. Somehow I thought I was at the cinema watching a war film. I remember looking at Bob standing up helplessly by the tracker as the Paras turned their anger on us, screaming and shouting obscenities. "You fucking crap-out bastards, why didn't you fire your fucking missiles, wankers? Twats, you didn't shoot the fuckers down." How do you explain it wasn't our fault that a fuse had blown, or the computer had crashed, or some 50-pence pin had gotten bent out of shape somewhere? That 3-2 Alpha should never have been there in the first place, and that the boys should have never been left sitting on their boats anyway. 7 hours spent playing cards and watching cartoons as they waited to die. The Paras and the Scots Guards, who were not far away, had run down to the water line to help with the casualties who were starting to come ashore in lifeboats. Many of them were obviously terribly injured. We couldn't go. We had to stay with our useless sodding rapier and its pointless bloody missiles. And anyway, I didn't want to go. I felt awful. I'd been in the hot seat, but I'd been unable to do anything to stop the attack. Oddly, as I sat transfixed in shock watching the Galahad burn and explode, someone stuck a mess tin of food on my knee. I couldn't eat. I was still shaking and shit scared and selfishly convinced we were going to die too. More planes were to arrive in a minute, and we couldn't even defend ourselves with our kit knackered. All seemed lost. I just wanted to get out of the seat and in the trench and bury my head in the mud. I shouted to Ricky, "Do us a favour, I'm getting cramp. I want to go and eat the scoff. Take over, will you?" Ricky didn't mind too much. He didn't know he was about to shoot down his first aircraft. I jumped out, Ricky jumped in, and I headed for the nearest trench. Put my tin lid on and started to ram my scoff down my throat. I just shoveled the first lump of stew in my mouth, fighting a feeling of nausea, when I heard the noise of death. A screaming jet engine heading our way. Where the fuck is it? The noise seemed to be coming from the sea. Wrong. It was another Skyhawk right behind us, and then streaking directly overhead, banking as it did. I could clearly read the words Armada on the white fuselage and see the pilot's helmet. Bob stood in the open and bravely spun the track ahead around after the receding jet as I watched tracer rounds from the para machine guns flashing uncomfortably close to his head, which continued banking to the left towards the sea, and then turned inland again, starting to come back towards us. He must have seen us and decided to come back and finish us off. We were all firing our rifles at the jet. Every round we had, just a token defensive gesture, as we sat there waiting to be incinerated, when suddenly, boosh, a rapier missile streaked off the beam towards a Skyhawk. It veered left and right, looking unstable before it gathered itself and went in true on course. "Get the bastard, Ricky." The pilot saw it coming and put his foot on the brake, braking hard to the right to evade the missile. "Too slow, Zay, fuck off, bang, direct hit." He was hit plumb centre and crashed into the mountainside in a huge fireball, as though he had been carrying napalm. Good job. He didn't drop it on his first run. At least this action saved us a bit of face, and even the remaining paras must have appreciated it, as the abuse became a little quieter now. On the ship below us, a total of 48 men had been killed, 32 Welsh Guardsmen, 11 other army personnel, and 5 RFA crewmen, with many more sadly burned and wounded. Among them, famously, was Simon Weston. It was the worst single loss of life in the war, the worst indeed since the Second World War. 6 Royal Marines died in a landing craft later on too. For what felt like hours, I sat in my trench and watched mesmerised as the helicopter pilots coiled in to pluck more survivors from the burning hulk became the heroes of the hour. Their flying was breathtaking. They flew blind through the clouds of choking black smoke, their rotor blades practically touching the burning side of the ship to lift casualties off. It was an awesome display of bravery and skill, especially in light of the potential for more air attacks at that moment. Gradually, the feelings of fear and shock ebbed away, and the relief at still being alive overcame everything. It was quite bizarre. For a while, I didn't feel cold, hungry, lonely, scared, tired, pissed off, or anything negative. It was like being immortal just for a while. After an hour or so, though, it was state normal. All that shit flooding back into my brain and body as I started to moan, as you do. I'm bloody freezing. It's shite. The Falklands are shite. Someone shout Index, please. The clear sky had clouded over, and an hour too late, it started to snow in June. Now we had something else to gripe about. The carnage of the day was temporarily forgotten, locked away deep inside my mind. Bob got on the blower and demanded a couple of intelligent crap-hats from the Remy. 312 was next to useless, and it needed a tonic, a gentle massage of its circuitry by the elegant piano-playing fingers of the techs. The kit had to work. It wasn't so much a case of us losing face anymore. It was more about losing our heads, legs and arms. Eventually, the Remy emerged through the snow like robo-cops with toolboxes and very high foreheads. We asked Bob to make the patient safe and administers an electronic LEMSIP. Told us to keep her wrapped up. They told us to keep her wrapped up, and if she didn't show any signs of shooting down aircraft in the morning, to give them another call and they would have to operate. squaddy black humour. We waved them bye-bye and copied one another by shivering and swearing. The paras started to copy us by shivering as well, only their shivering was more hard, like airborne shivering, not your bog standard crap-at shivering. As night fell, we switched to our normal routine: food, sentry duty and sleep. It sounds harsh, but life had to go on. It was no use crying over burnt guardsmen, and we didn't, although it would eventually hit me hard, very hard. Terrible feelings of guilt, sobbing, tears, horrific flashbacks, wishing I'd died out there myself. My mind had shut down those emotions for the time being. We had survived our last major action of the war. That was my recollection of that awful day. So it's not a case of if you enjoyed it or it's just what happened. War's a horrible thing. And not a day goes by, literally hasn't. Not one day has gone by without me remembering those events. But we've got to try and live our lives as best we can for those we lost. Thank you. Road Gunner 12 out.